All right, so we're diving deep today into High Output Management by Andrew S. Grove.
Hmm.
And one thing that really jumps out when you read Grove is how often he talks about management like it's a sport. Like he uses all these sports analogies.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And, Grove was a huge figure at Intel, right? He was there from the early days and worked his way up to CEO.
Right.
So, he's not just talking theory here, he's speaking from experience and drawing these parallels from all sorts of different fields. And we
Mhm.
really wanted to explore those analogies today and see what they can teach us about, motivation performance, what it really means to be a manager and all that. So today it's all about management through a lens of sports.
I like that. Let's
Yeah.
unpack this.
Let's get into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, Grove hits us with this powerful statement.
Right.
He says, a manager's output is the output of the organization under his supervision or influence.
I mean, think about that for a second. It's like he's saying being a manager is all about the team.
Right.
It's not about your individual performance. It's about the collective result.
Exactly. It's like a coach in a way.
Exactly. Like you said, a coach. Their success is measured by how well the team performs.
Right. And to really excel, even the most talented team needs direction. And that's where things get interesting because Grove then really gets into this idea of performance, both at the team level and at the individual level.
Right.
And he argues that a manager's most important job is to help each person on their team reach their full potential,
Their peak performance.
their personal best.
Yeah.
And he talks about two main ways to boost performance training and motivation.
And it's with motivation where the sports analogies become really insightful, I think.
I think so too.
Because Grove argues you can't just force someone to be motivated. Motivation has to come from within.
Right.
But he says that a manager can create the conditions for that motivation to flourish.
Right. It's kind of like a coach creating the optimal training environment for their athletes. You give them the tools, the support, the challenges they need to push themselves further.
And then Grove makes this really interesting suggestion.
Okay.
He says to really boost productivity, we should try to endow work with the characteristics of competitive sports.
That's an interesting thought because, most people think of work and sports as being totally different worlds, right?
Yeah, totally. There's this perception that sports are fun.
And work as well?
Work.
A grind.
Right. And even Grove acknowledges this. He says people often think sports are good and fun, but work is drudgery.
Right. But he suggests the sort of if you can't beat them, join them approach.
Right.
If people are naturally drawn to the competitive spirit of sports, maybe we can bring some of that energy into the workplace.
And so the question becomes, how do we actually do that?
Right. How do we bring the spirit of competition into the office?
Well, Grove highlights a couple of key things.
Okay.
First, he says we need to establish clear rules of the game.
What does that mean?
It means making sure everyone understands the objectives, the process, what defines success. Like in basketball, everyone knows the rules.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what it takes to win.
Okay.
So in the workplace, that means having clear goals, clear expectations for everyone.
Got it.
And second, Grove says you got to give people a way to measure themselves.
Like a scoreboard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like athletes track their stats.
Yeah.
Employees need ways to see how they're doing, how they're stacking up against the goals, and maybe even against their peers.
Makes sense.
Because Grove says that drive to really perform at your best often comes from going up against something or somebody.
Right. Having something to strive for.
Right. And he illustrates this perfectly with an example from Intel.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
So he talks about the facilities maintenance group at Intel.
Okay.
And, they were responsible for keeping the buildings clean and in good shape.
Makes sense.
But apparently they weren't doing a great job. Right. Yeah. And Grove says they tried all sorts of things to improve performance, pressure bonuses, the usual stuff. But nothing seemed to work.
So what did they do?
Well, they decided to introduce an element of competition.
Okay.
They came up with a system where each building's upkeep was scored by a senior manager who worked in that building.
Okay.
They called these managers building czars.
Building czars. Interesting.
And so each building had a score, and these scores were made public.
Like a public scoreboard.
Exactly.
Wow. So suddenly it wasn't just about keeping things tidy. It was about getting the best score.
Exactly. And Grove says the results were pretty dramatic.
Really?
Yeah. Almost immediately, the upkeep of all the buildings improved significantly.
Wow. That's amazing. And they didn't even need to offer more money or anything.
No. The key was introducing this racetrack, this arena of competition.
The scoreboard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by giving the teams a way to track their progress, see how they were doing compared to the others, it just totally changed their motivation. For them, that top score became the reward.
It's fascinating, right? It wasn't about external rewards. It was about the satisfaction of doing well and being recognized for it.
Right.
And it really proves Grove's point about motivation coming from within.
Yeah. And then to contrast that, Grove tells another story about a newspaper columnist.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. What was it about again?
So this columnist really enjoyed his work.
Yeah.
He thrived on trying to be better than the competition.
Okay.
But then his newspaper merged with its rival.
Oh.
And the columnist actually found that he wasn't enjoying his work as much anymore.
Really? But why?
Because, as he put it, there isn't anyone else to beat.
Wow. That's so interesting. Taking away that competitive element actually made him less motivated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It shows how that sense of competition, that drive to outperform, can be a huge motivator, even if we don't always realize it.
Right. It makes you wonder, how often is that kind of competition present in our own work, even if it's just friendly rivalry? And how would we feel if it were gone? So we've talked about the benefits of competition, but Grove also talks about something else that's really important.
What's that?
Failure.
Ah, yes.
He uses sports to help us rethink how we view setbacks.
Right. Because in sports, losing is inevitable.
Exactly. Like in any competitive sport, at least half the matches are lost.
Right. But athletes don't just give up because they lost a game.
Right. They learn from it. They come back stronger.
And Grove says we should approach our work with the same mindset.
So instead of seeing failure as a disaster, we should see it as a learning opportunity.
Exactly. Like a chance to improve, to figure out what went wrong and do better next time.
Right. It's all part of the process.
Right. And Grove also talks about this concept called task-relevant maturity, or TRM.
Oh, yeah. What was that about again?
So TRM is all about a person's experience and competence with a specific task.
Okay.
It's not about their overall intelligence or skill. It's about how familiar they are with that particular activity.
Right.
And Grove uses a great analogy to explain this.
Okay, I like analogies.
He says, imagine a driver who's really experienced on quiet country roads,
Okay.
but then they suddenly have to drive on a busy freeway.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
Yeah, their experience on those country roads
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily translate to the freeway, right?
Right. They'd need to adapt to a whole new set of challenges.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's kind of like TRM. It can change depending on the situation.
Yeah. So someone might be really good at one task, but a complete novice at another.
Right, and that's where the manager comes in, because they need to adjust their style based on the individual's TRM.
Okay, so it's like coaching.
Exactly.
Right.
If someone has low TRM for a task, they need more direct instruction, more supervision, a more hands-on approach.
Like a coach working closely with a new player.
Right. But as their TRM grows, the manager can step back a bit, give them more autonomy, more freedom to make decisions.
Like a coach trusting a more experienced player.
Exactly. It's all about adapting your leadership style to the individual's needs and their level of experience with the task at hand.
Makes sense. And Grove also briefly mentions performance bonuses and how they can be a form of feedback.
Right. It's like in sports, where athletes are constantly getting feedback through scores, rankings, coaches' evaluations, and so on.
Right. Performance bonuses provide that tangible feedback in the workplace.
Exactly. It shows people how they're scoring in their role.
And it reinforces the connection between performance and reward.
Right. It's all part of creating that cycle of motivation and improvement.
So it's clear that Grove really believed in the power of competition and using sports analogies to understand management.
Yeah. And he wasn't just making abstract comparisons. He provided real-world examples of how these principles can be applied to achieve amazing results.
Right. And the key takeaway for our listeners is to think about how they can apply these ideas in their own work.
Yeah. How can you create those racetracks, those opportunities for healthy competition in your own environment?
How can you give people clear ways to measure their progress and strive for something bigger?
It's all about tapping into that human desire to compete and achieve.
And Grove's sports analogies give us a really powerful framework for doing just that.
I think so, too.
So there you have it, folks. Management through the lens of sports.
Food for thought.
See you next time.
Bye.